Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, colleagues. A warm welcome to each of you from wherever you are joining us in the world. We are grateful you are here, and we thank you for your interest, your time, and your presence today in this webinar. Before we continue, we would like to take a moment to be very specific and mindful of the fact that this webinar addresses issues related to many intersecting expressions of violence which may be uncomfortable, upsetting, or triggering for some. Here, we aim to create a safe space to discuss these challenging topics that pervade our societies and limit our collective work. We encourage you, the listener and participant, to please take care. Now, a few matters of virtual housekeeping. First, please be aware that this session is being recorded and will be available on Agent's webpage. Microphones will be muted to minimize connectivity distractions. However, your participation is encouraged in the questions and chat box. Key resources are in the handout box in the control panel, and here you can find easy access to PDF documents and for download. We recommend using the question function to share questions, experiences, and observations with us. And we advise using the chat box to talk to our webinar facilitators. And if you have any issues, please feel free to chat with me as well as my colleagues, Laura Sabator and Laura Cooper Hall in the control panel. Together, we will be keeping an eye on questions or concerns. Our partner, Corinne Hart, will be reviewing questions and comments for the moderated section at the end of today's webinar. Today's session kicks off a webinar series that will continue throughout this year, building awareness, strategies, and community towards better understanding and addressing gender-based violence and environment linkages. My name is Jamie Wenbesson, and I am the Knowledge and Communications Manager with the IUCN Gender Team. IUCN is proudly co-hosting the series with USAID, our partner. Together, IUCN and USAID are prioritizing attention to gender-based violence and environment linkages through our partnership on Agent, Advancing Gender in the Environment. The Agent partnership supports this webinar series and in turn benefits from it, as we aim to collaborate with a wide range of partners and practitioners from around the world to spotlight promising practices. Our aim is to build a better, more informed and cross-sectoral community of practice together. Our purpose today is to try and build a common understanding of gender-based violence and how it intersects with meeting environment and sustainable development goals. We will present the overarching research that IUCN has published on the topic with support from and in partnership with USAID. And finally, perhaps most importantly, as we apply new knowledge and learning to inform better practice, we launched the winners of USAID's RISE Challenge, which supports strategies to tackle GBV in relation to natural resource access and control. Now, before we get started, I would like to take a quick moment and ask if you can answer a question for us. We'd like to hear from you on how you would personally rate your current knowledge on GBV and environment linkages. Our aim is to use this information to inform future webinars. I'll give you about 30 seconds to make a selection for us. And we'll have about 15 seconds left in this poll. All right, thank you. Many of you have now voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll for now. Thank you so much for sharing your views. We take this information into account when we develop future sessions. But for the time being, I will share the results of that poll now with about 80% respondents. Okay, great. Now, a quick review of our agenda today. In just a few moments, I will pass the floor to IUCN and USAID for brief welcoming remarks. Then my colleague, Kate Oren, will make a presentation summarizing the extensive paper IUCN published earlier this year. Our colleague and partner, Chaitra Shenoy, USAID's Senior Gender-Based Violence Advisor, will speak to the importance of innovating and investing in this intersection of issues and present the 5 winners of USAID's RISE Challenge. We will then hear from Richard Aluka, a special guest and monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning advisor from one of those winning organizations, who will share with us some remarks on why RISE provides an opportunity to leverage validated strategies to tackle GBV, in this case by addressing land rights and tenure in Eastern Uganda. Towards the end of our session today, our partner Corinne Hart from USAID will moderate a discussion, fielding questions and sharing comments from you, our audience. And again, we encourage that you submit questions, comments, and experiences at any point, and we will collect them through the collection box. Now, it is my pleasure to invite IUCN's Global Director for the Nature-Based Solutions Unit, Stuart McGuinness, to share some words of welcome. Stuart, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Jamie. Colleagues, good afternoon or good morning. It's a real pleasure, and thank you very much to the team for asking me to make some opening comments. I think if we sort of look over the history of the 20th century, it's quite clear that decision makers viewed conservation of natural resources as somewhat of a peripheral issue to national and global agendas. At best, it was perhaps considered as a worthy interest. At worst, it was considered as an obstacle to development. However, the growing scientific consensus indicates that such views were deeply flawed. And as the IPBES Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services highlights, nature is essential for human existence and good quality of life. So currently, as attention begins to switch from the exigency of containing and managing the current COVID-19 pandemic to its aftermath, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity is presented to us as a society of the pathway we wish to travel. Do we want to pick up where we left off, or do we want to begin to build back in a manner that is better both for the planet and its citizens? Building back better does not just mean favoring new technologies or stimulating desirable patterns of economic choices and behaviors. It also means fundamentally acknowledging, understanding, and purposefully addressing the inequalities that have driven and shaped how the Earth's resources have been used, how the benefits have been distributed, and who has borne the cost. Central to this is the need to challenge the pervasive barriers of gender inequality that deprives women and girls of basic rights and the prejudice that constrains their agency in solving 21st century challenges. In this, IUCN is proud to be a leader, a catalyst, and a convener on this path towards a just world that values and conserves nature. At IUCN, we've made a strong commitment to gender responsiveness, to gender responsive action and impact, as we recognize that gender equality is foundational to meeting our goals. Across our programs, from forest landscape restoration to coastal resilience to scaling up nature-based solutions, we build awareness, tools, and strategies to ensure not only that a gender lens improves our work, but that our efforts provide opportunities for empowering those most commonly left out and for advancing gender equality. And at the same time, we continue to challenge ourselves. There is still much more that we need to learn and integrate into our activities. We at IUCN have championed gender responsive environmental action for many years, and we are grateful for the thousands of members and partners who have walked this path with us. In particular, I would like to thank USAID for being such a steadfast partner and champion. It is thanks to our collaboration we were able to document and profile the gender-based violence environment linkages and illustrate that they're not just an act of ad hoc brutality, but a sinister, systematic, and frequently used means of disempowerment and disenfranchisement. So today it gives me great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of IUCN to kick off this webinar, the first in a series. On behalf of the organizing team, I want to thank you for your interest in this extremely important topic and for the time you've taken today for joining us and also for continuing with us in what comes next. Today, we not only launch the work we've built together, but start a new phase to improve the way we work every single day across sectors for people and for nature. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Now, it's a great honor to have our partner from USAID represented by Diana Prieto, the Acting Director of the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment. Diana, I also give you the floor.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone who has joined us today. I'm very grateful to be able to be a part of this important discussion and really impressed with the number of people who have signed in and joined us. Thank you very much for your interest. USAID, and in particular, the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, is very pleased to partner with IUCN in our Advancing Gender in the Environment Initiative, or AGENT. This important initiative allows USAID and IUCN to work together to fill crucial evidence gaps, build capacity, and raise awareness of the important nexus of gender equality and the environment. Through AGENT, we sought to better understand the linkages between gender-based violence and multiple environment sectors. This included identifying how and when different types of GBV take place, and if and how they are addressed in environment sectors throughout the world. The results of this collaboration have demonstrated the real urgency and need to address these issues together and to build the evidence documenting those linkages. Around the world, gender-based violence is pervasive and rooted in systemic power imbalances. GBV is a human rights violation, a public health challenge, and a barrier to civic, social, political, and economic development. For example, it is estimated that there are 650 million women and girls today who were married before the age of 18. While almost all countries have criminalized rape, in 11 countries, perpetrators can escape prosecution if they marry the victim. And 58% of murdered women die at the hands of intimate partners or family members. Gender-based violence has cyclical and widespread impacts. For example, a look at intimate partner violence alone shows that women exposed to intimate partner violence are twice as likely to experience depression, 1.5 times more likely to contract HIV and other infections, and 16% more likely to have a low birth weight baby. USAID has long understood the challenge of addressing pervasive gender inequality and gender-based violence as a barrier for peaceful, prosperous, and secure communities. USAID's gender equality and female empowerment policy mandates the integration of gender across our program cycle. And this is a requirement that has now been codified in law through the Bipartisan Women's Entrepreneurship and Economic Empowerment Act of 2018. One of the objectives of the gender policy is precisely the reduction of gender-based violence and the mitigation of its harmful effects on individuals and communities. And this in turn aligns with the United States government's strategy to prevent and respond to gender-based violence globally. For decades, USAID has addressed gender-based violence across multiple strategic sectors such as health, education, land rights, and others, as well as in our humanitarian programming. In the last 3 years alone, USAID has reached more than 18 million individuals with gender-based violence services, including health, legal, psychosocial, counseling, and other. Today, we're pleased to not only help share the results of the findings of this collaboration under AGENT, but also to show support in investing in next step solutions. Our partnership demonstrates the value of establishing knowledge bases towards informing practice and interventions to address gender-based violence, such as our Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Environments Challenge, which you will hear about in a little bit. I hope you find this webinar and subsequent tools and approaches illuminating as well. We look forward to continuing to work with all of you in the future to address gender-based violence in the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much for Diana, for your remarks and for your commitment to this work. Now it's my pleasure to hand the floor to my colleague, Kate Oren.
Thanks, Jamie. And thank you very much, Stuart and Diana, both of you, for setting a tone of commitment and action for our discussion today and for our work ahead. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Oren. I'm so excited to see the number of participants coming on the line. We feel so lucky to have your time today. As I begin here, I would like to acknowledge some of the many colleagues I know are on the other end of that line, researchers and co-authors of this paper I'll present today, including my colleagues in IUCN's global program on governance and rights, along with many of you I know are there on this line who contributed in so very many ways to informing this research process, the final publication, and already next steps happening. I want to express our gratitude to you for helping us and committing to elevating attention at the nexus of these issues. The outline of what I will speak to today is as follows. First, I'll share a brief note of context, why we developed this research and how we aim to use it. I'll share our overarching research methodology and some of the key takeaways that emerged along the way. I'll review snapshots of evidence across sectors and themes, by no means exhaustive, but where our following webinar sessions will dive more deeply. And finally, key summary recommendations, including directed at ourselves for IUCN and USAID together to put knowledge into action. And maybe most importantly, at the very conclusion of this webinar, we'll talk about how to get or stay involved and how to share and amplify the work that you may already be doing on these issues. So as has been mentioned, the context under which we've pursued this research is a 10-year collaboration with USAID called AGENT. AGENT's objective is twofold. Sorry, we're having a little technical glitch here. To strengthen environment programming and results through gender responsiveness, and to leverage the unique opportunities that environmental and sustainable development programming actually offer to advance and accelerate women's rights and empowerment and gender equality. AGENT works through 3 interlinked strategies: identifying and filling information gaps, using that knowledge to build awareness and capacities, making the case for gender and for the environment, and then in cyclical fashion, then developing and providing tailored support toward more gender responsive strategies and outcomes, which can very often then uncover new knowledge gaps and needs. And it is really through this that we came to this very fundamental research question. Through our various work together, one of the most predominant issues we've found is that gender-based violence happens all the time, across sectors, countries, communities, contexts, and yet a considerable knowledge gap and lack of tools has meant that it's rarely addressed, or at least not addressed enough. So we set out to gather the evidence to establish a knowledge base, building awareness and understanding along the way. We wanted to present something of a landscape view, a 360-degree view of linkages, to get a broad sense of drivers, impacts, trends. And by the end, we aim to target recommendations, including to ourselves, primarily to inform more gender-responsive environment work, but also at the same time to ensure environment issues factor prominently into programming actually geared to prevent GBV prevention and response. On the screen here, you see a snapshot view of the methodology and process, which included, for example, the review of more than 1,000 documents in 3 languages, a call for case studies, and a survey disseminated to gender and environment practitioners to gather more information, evidence, and insights. Interviews and peer review were also complemented by an expert consultation workshop that validated and enriched a 0 draft last year. Finally, the publication launched in January, fast becoming one of the most accessed resources in the whole of the IUCN library, which I think says something to the need for information on this topic. And next steps are already underway, which I'll come to later. We have to end with some good news. More than 80 submissions were made to our call for case studies that clearly documented gender-based violence in relation to environment issues. Those most clearly showing the linkages span different themes and sectors, as shown here in this graphic. Access to natural resources was the most common theme, followed by climate change. The cases that were directly submitted to our call actually helped to guide and validate our own understanding and application of the definition of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence is any harm or potential of harm perpetrated on the basis of gender. Each of us has a right to live a life free of violence, but the pervasiveness is extraordinary. Global level data suggest 1 in 3 women experience physical or sexual violence in her lifetime, but we also know these figures reflect serious underreporting and conditions of impunity that allow for that. Gender-based violence has many expressions, which often reinforce each other, and the impacts of violence are widespread, as Diana has already mentioned, affecting individuals across the life course with direct and indirect costs to families, communities, economies, global public health development, and the protection and resilience of our environment. Findings from the survey we conducted reinforce this, with further experiences submitted from across all regions of the world. Analysis of more than 300 survey inputs showed that more than half of respondents confirmed having observed GBV in project implementation in some way, but several challenges exist to address it. Nearly half of respondents noted that GBV was not considered a priority. So, for example, gathering the political will or the financial resources to be able to address that violence is a problem, while close to 3/4 pointed to a lack of knowledge on the issue specifically, whether their own or in their organization, acting as a barrier to forging effective strategies. Through the research process itself, several things became very quickly clear. First, that understanding and addressing these linkages is crucial to meeting our goals, including the Sustainable Development Goals and interlinked agenda, but that rarely are these issues taken together. It became clear that major knowledge gaps exist, with uneven information across sectors, scarce quantitative data, few tailored tools geared from and for environment sector decision makers and actors. Knowledge gaps exist for many reasons, including our deeply held sociocultural customs, attitudes of acceptance, fear, sense of overwhelm, and situations of impunity, all of which actually contribute to a lack of documentation. I'll put this in a very blunt way too. GBV is witnessed or employed, but not considered the responsibility of a given project and thus not written down. Finally, some thinking outside of the box is required, which again, we will come back to at the end. That's where we have some good news. Ultimately, what we find is that across environment sectors and spheres, gender-based violence is regularly employed as a form of socioeconomic control to maintain or promote unequal and gendered power dynamics relating to the ownership of, access to, uses of, benefits derived from, and control over natural resources. The potential for violence is particularly heightened in the face of environmental stressors, where the control over increasingly scarce or degraded resources and associated livelihoods results in higher tension, increased negative coping strategies, and reduced resilience for families and communities. We present the evidence organized across 3 main categories. First, in relation to the access and control of land and resources. Here, power imbalance and inequality related to the land use, tenure, and ownership, and to the access and control of natural resources are among the conditions that underpin gender-based violence across these spheres. Next, we examine major pressures and threats to the environment, where gender-based violence is employed to exploit resources, and where worsening environmental conditions actually exacerbate gender-based violence. Finally, we look at the very work of protecting the environment, the varied violence that is experienced, and as we've seen, that which is used to diminish or thwart environmental action. I want to flag again here that this whole webinar series will, in subsequent sessions, aim to dive far more deeply into each of these topics. Disaster and climate change, for example, coming up soon, including with a very wide range of speakers and collaborators. Additional topics will also very likely be added along the way. For example, a webinar on addressing GBV throughout the project cycle specifically. But for the next few minutes, I will share some predominant findings from across the core themes. And I do want to say I'm about halfway through my presentation at this point, but I want to pause, a safety check. The following slides are heavy and can feel overwhelming, so please take care. In relation to land and resources, gender-based violence is regularly employed to control and maintain power dynamics, including those around typically gendered tasks, such as collecting and managing water, plants for food and medicine and fuels. These responsibilities can often put women and girls disproportionately in everyday dangerous situations as they complete these tasks, especially in the context of resource scarcity or interrupted access to these resources for any and all reasons, when they must spend more time and walk further distances to get what they need. Gender-based violence is used to maintain the status quo, with research showing that diverse actors, including actually both women and men, employ gendered violence as a means for controlling land and resources, including as a tool to exert force and to manage sociocultural status, as well as for negotiations over resources and for facilitating property grabbing in many parts of the world. Here and throughout, it's important to underscore that Indigenous communities, especially Indigenous women in all regions of the world, face intersecting forms of discrimination, marginalization, and violence, making them, in particular here, altogether more vulnerable to land grabbing and associated GBV, which impacts loss of identity, livelihood, and culture. And particular dynamics are evident in relation to specific sectors, with some variation across contexts. Across parts of Southeast Asia, for example, young boys are trafficked into illegal fishing industry, where they suffer physical and sexual abuse, while gender-based violence is evident in survival strategies and everyday negotiations. Sex for fish transactions, so common in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, it's considered a deeply entrenched part of social and economic fabric. While the specific links between gender-based violence and land rights tend to be extremely context-specific, lack of or limited access to land ownership has an overall negative impact on women's agricultural productivity and food security, as access to water resources, agricultural and financial services, and markets very often depend on land ownership. These barriers have a multiplied effect and can result in gender-based violence. For instance, a study from a Green Forum in Cameroon, as depicted here on the screen, showed barriers to resources are correlated with domestic violence, explaining that the combination of legal and customary norms, so for example, women not being able to inherit land, and economic restrictions reinforced men's control over women. At larger scale, we see these issues repeat and magnify. Extractives and large-scale agribusiness can disrupt ecosystems, social systems, and local economies, sometimes displacing local communities, degrading and polluting the environment, interrupting access to increasingly stressed or scarce natural resources, and affecting livelihoods. These are all linked with gendered dynamics and in particular evidence of GBV. Brief examples. These industries predominantly rely on a gendered division of labor, wherein men often benefit most in the form of land compensation and job opportunity, while women may lose access to land and resources necessary for their family's nutrition and livelihood. These industries can tend to bring high numbers of men workers to an area, often a very remote area, creating conditions for sexual and other forms of harassment and abuse, coerced prostitution, sexual exploitation and trafficking, and commodification in particular of women and girls, with evidence coming again from many parts of the world, from Senegal to Peru to Brazil to Canada. Women employed in these sectors face numerous gendered barriers, but lack of formal employment contracts in the agricultural workforce especially can mean that women are less inclined to, or even prevented from, reporting instances of abuse. And then we look at illegal activity. Environmental crimes which now represent the fourth largest form of transnational organized crime just after the drug trade, has an estimated growth rate 2 to 3 times faster than the global economy. Gender-based violence is one of the means for enabling criminal activity, with clear cases related to illegal charcoal trading, illegal unreported and unregulated fishing, illicit mining, and wildlife trafficking. The militarization of these activities relies on gender norms and GBV to function, but evidence also shows that GBV can be used in attempts to prevent criminal activity, for example, through militarization of efforts to combat poaching, affecting women predominantly, for example, when they attempt to access resources in protected zones. And with these illicit activities thriving in conditions of limited governance, exploiting resources in illegal mining has been linked to various expressions of violence, from human trafficking, coerced transactional sex, sexual abuse, forced and child labor, and other expressions as a means to enable these crimes. These various interlinked expressions can worsen in many ways in disaster contexts. Data is emerging now across all regions of our world that disaster situations of all kinds escalate incidents of gender-based violence. We don't have to look much further than this current pandemic we live in to see this very real evidence in all our countries. The various stresses that result from disaster situations and persist in recovery phases trigger and exacerbate GBV everywhere. Here, for example, is an image of the 300% spike in reports of intimate partner violence after 2 tropical cyclones in Vanuatu. So when we look across disaster contexts and the impacts of a changing climate, we again see some prominent themes. Conditions of scarcity are linked to GBV in global north and south. Droughts across Australia, for example, and post-hurricane contexts in the US triggered rises in various forms of violence, while coping strategies, survival strategies, such as child marriage, have been documented across sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia. Evidence also suggests that these resource-constrained and highly stressful conditions increase impunity, creating overall fragile conditions. Gender-based violence in emergency-related migration and displacement situations is evident, with shelters and evacuation centers being particularly unsafe for women and also for other commonly marginalized people, but also because scarcity creates conditions for exploitation and vulnerability to trafficking. After Typhoon Haiyan in Thailand in 2013, there was a nearly 30% increase in human trafficking. We must pay special attention to the specific situation of women environmental human rights defenders, including that Indigenous women face multiple threats and risks due to interlinked sociocultural, racial, ethnic norms and biases. And evidence is mounting continuously, which is a serious cause for alarm. We found clear indication that the rise in activity of women environmental human rights defenders, which is of course due to their action against environmental threats, is met with violent and gendered means of control. For women defenders, in addition to physical and sexual violence, cyber and other forms of violence are used to particularly target, threaten, diminish, silence, and humiliate them, very often leveraging gender norms as a weapon, for example, labeling them bad mothers, whores, or crazy women, and using the threat of rape as a weapon. Finally, as inequality does not fit neatly in a box somewhere to address somewhere else by someone else, we must look at how these issues intersect with our own work as policymakers, researchers, advisors, and practitioners. Gender-based discrimination and violence does not happen in a vacuum and affects people across all spheres of their life. No sector's work life is safely excluded, and who we are and how we work matters for the communities and ecosystems we aim to serve and bolster. Women in particular, but not exclusively, can experience multiple overlapping forms of discrimination based on their gender, but also on their race, ethnicity, sexuality, and other identities. In some cases, this discrimination can be exerted through violence, harassment, abuse, etc., which is used to reinforce unequal power relationships. These multiple overlapping forms of discrimination determine the roles that people have and their opportunities, pay, and safety at work. This, in turn, affects whose ideas and contributions mattered and are valued, affecting environment programming, strategies, beneficiaries, results, how projects are staffed. These issues were flagged repeatedly in cases and survey responses submitted to us, situations of women rangers, young women researchers being excluded from peer-reviewed journals, sexual favors demanded in exchange for job opportunities. And when gendered issues are not considered, unfortunately, projects, even very well-meaning ones, can inadvertently exacerbate gender-based violence. Upholding rights-based standards and safeguards is, to a significant extent, everyone's business. So let's talk about what works to address some of these odds. Across sectors, there are practical examples and applications of promising practice from nascent to well-proven stages that we must learn, elevate, and replicate. For example, some organizations have taken proactive steps to include GBV specifically in their attention to increasingly gender-responsive approaches, establishing zero-tolerance policies, resourcing implementation of those policies, and devoting attention to GBV and safeguards. Securing land rights is a powerful lever across diverse contexts, which we'll hear more about in remarks ahead. Some projects and programs have implemented specific strategies to aid in meeting their environment results, supporting women's collective agency and action to improve their bargaining power as stewards for coastal resilience has been seen as an important step, for example. Empowering men as survivors of GBV themselves and as partners to tackle GBV is fundamental. Empowering networks of men as champions toward gender equality that benefits all and supports the well-being and resilience of all has been effective around the world, one example being the Responsible Men Club in Vietnam. And importantly, we can learn from other sectors, from humanitarian interventions, for example, that have well-established tools, approaches, and lessons. So this brings me to my last slide today, a snapshot of our core recommendations. There are powerful ways to do better, from raising awareness to devoting attention to specific contexts for more profound research, to fully mainstreaming gender and explicitly GBV in our project cycles, to investing in protocols and procedures to safely address GBV that's happening now and to prevent future abuse. We have many opportunities. As I've mentioned, we have lessons to learn from other sectors, including to ensure that GBV is adequately reflected in project development, in safeguards, in protocols, and resources. The importance of building cross-sectoral collaborations cannot be overstated to meet our interlinked goals, and that requires innovation and investment from numerous directions. Fortunately, we do have a partner in USAID who has already turned this learning into practice. And so now it gives me a lot of joy to hand the floor to our partner, Chaitra Shenoy at USAID, to tell us more about USAID's work in this area and specifically the RISE Global Challenge. So Che, take it over.
Thank you, Kate. I am really grateful to be here, spending time with you all, going through one of our dreams, which has been just an amazing journey to get to where we are right now. And I use the word we because this has been a collaborative effort, not only with IUCN, but in my office, the Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, as you heard from our director, Diana Prieto, this has been a very collaborative effort in USAID to really understand the intersection of gender-based violence and environment. I also want to give a recognition to Corinne Hart, who's the Senior Gender and Environment Advisor, who works with myself on the following challenge that I will be talking to you all about. So USAID tackles gender-based violence and has been for over the last 2 decades, if not since the 70s. It has partnered with a variety of different organizations, including faith-based organizations and host government institutions, to really increase the awareness of gender-based violence and its impact across a variety of different sectors. We've also looked to strengthen prevention efforts, from looking at healthcare to education and economic growth, and improve services for survivors of gender-based violence and a variety of different forms of gender-based violence. So we do this as it relates to this particular intersection of environment and gender-based violence. As Kate mentioned, USAID commissioned IUCN through its agent partnership to conduct what she has just described, a very expansive research effort on the linkages between these two issues. The research findings, as clearly shown in the last couple of slides, the pervasiveness of gender-based violence and environment, and the major gaps that continue to exist in the environmental sectors, and how those gaps are really creating an urgent need for change. So with that, there was a lot of effort put towards figuring out how to address these gaps. And so USAID created a global challenge to identify, implement promising practices to address and prevent GBV in environmental projects through the RISE challenge. All right, so I am really thrilled again to showcase the RISE challenge and the approach that we are taking. We issued the challenge back in August of 2019, and we did this excuse me, how I did that. How do I go back? Nope. Sorry, guys. Thank you, Jamie. So we did this by a variety of different ways. We wanted to incentivize, source, and test promising and proven interventions that prevent and respond to GBV across environmental sectors. And we wanted to take promising practices from other sectors and apply it to the environmental sector, recognizing that there will be a lot of research generated through testing out these interventions. We wanted to engage and foster non-traditional partners and create partnerships that what we had heard were not really happening, which was environmental organizations working with women-led women organizations or gender-based violence organizations to work together and elevate this problem, and then build and communicate an evidence base for interventions. So through that, we put together the Together We Rise, the Resilient, Inclusive, and Sustainable Environments. This was a challenge to address gender-based violence in the environment. Again, this was commissioned and put out as a challenge in August of last year. And we received over 190 applications from 49 countries. And you can see the breakdown of where we received applications from. in terms of the geographies. This entire process was actually initiated through a co-design workshop with a variety of different stakeholders, some of you who are on this call right now. And I'm grateful for that active participation, because it brought us to this point of getting an application out, figuring out what this challenge is. As Kate mentioned, I mean, this is wide and deep. And we knew that we couldn't tackle every single piece that was brought up in the IUCN's research, but we wanted to narrow it down as much as possible without completely focusing too much on one particular area. So through that, this application went out. We had 52 judges from around USAID, as well as external judges, who helped select finalists from a variety of different countries. We have 5 outstanding grantees. I can't underscore how amazing it has been to have conversations, engage with these grantees and the communities that they serve, to understand the various issues that they're seeing on the ground as it relates to this particular issue of gender-based violence in their particular sector. We had a summit with the grantees that I'm going to be sharing with you in the next couple of minutes in January here in Washington, D.C., to build a network and a cohort to really think through problem sets and share what has worked in their particular activities and in their particular regions that they are working on. So the first one that I'm going to share is the Fiji activity. This is called Tackling Resource Conflict and Addressing Gender-Based Risks through RED+ in Fiji. The grantees are Marcel Day and We Her. Marcel Day, with World Bank funds, has supported Fiji RED+. And for those that don't recognize that acronym, RED+ is reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. It's a program in design and implementation of a feedback, grievances, and redress mechanism. This mechanism facilitates a two-way communication between communities and national government agencies or companies to solve resource-based disputes and conflicts that arise from the RED+ programming. So with the RISE funding, the consortium of partners will use We Her's proven approach to integrate gender, known as IDARE, and to improve the feedback, grievances, and redress mechanism to better address gender-based violence risks. As a result of GBV, as a result of payment for ecosystem services programming such as RED+. So here are some of the outcomes that we are hoping. We're hoping to have increased understanding of gender differentiated risks and impacts of RED+ implementation, an adoption of a GBV inclusive RED+ FGRM with new safeguards created or modified, and increased awareness of and ability to safely access this mechanism by local communities, a key point. The next grantee is their activity is called Resourceful, Elevating Women's Voices for Human and Environmental Protection in Congolese Small-Scale Mining Sites. And this is taking place in the DRC. ASEFA and Harvard Humanitarian Initiative are the 2 grantees. So in 2016, HHI conducted a study that found widespread GBV in artisanal mining sites in the DRC, including 1 in 7 women who are required to trade sex for access to work in mining. ASEFA and HHI project aims to develop an evidence-based scalable, and replicable curriculum to address human rights, gender-based violence, and environmental protection. They are looking to train 360 women and mine miners through a year-long curriculum on human rights, women's protection, and measures for reducing environmental impact for artisanal mining in 4 project sites within the provinces of North Kivu, South Kivu, and Maniema. 2 of the 4 communities will receive additional training that examines the link between people who work in mining towns and how humans are connected to their environment, with the main goal of both environmental and human outcomes to prove this type of curriculum is better in achieving environmental and gender goals. So some of the expected outcomes is an evidence-based, scalable, and replicable curriculum that's developed and tested. Women's and local communities having an increased knowledge on women's rights and on good environmental and safe mining practices, and reducing the number of women who trade sex for economic opportunities. Our next grantee is taking place in Colombia. It's another activity that will be looking at artisanal and small-scale mining. It's called Creative Capacity Building to Address Gender-Based Violence in Artisanal and Small-Scale Mining Sector in Colombia. And we have ARM, which is Alliance for Responsible Mining, as well as Massachusetts Institute for Technology Development Lab, or MIT Lab. Again, a study done by ARM found that gender inequality and GBV are widespread in the mining communities. With RISE funding, ARM and MIT will be introducing GBV prevention and response into an existing activity that aims to increase socioeconomic opportunities for women miners while reducing environmental impacts in a region of Colombia. This project will use a proven and innovative movement building approach to address GBV in mining. Through this approach, ARM will create safe spaces for women to share their GBV experiences and framework to build skills to help identify specific GBV challenges and to collectively build solutions. So some of the outcomes that we're hoping for in this activity is women miners have the skills necessary and are organized to overcome social and economic gender-based violence, to really hone in on the movement building approach in addressing GBV and make sure as it's piloted that it's also validated, and progress in the inclusion of social and economic GBV in mining standards and policies. Our next grantee is also in the DRC, and they are looking to promote women's rights and improving women's access to land and GBV referral systems. And our grantees are Women for Women International and Innovation and Training for Development and Peace, IFDP. So Women for Women International has worked for the past 15 years to improve the situation of women in Congolese province of South Kivu by addressing the drivers of GBV and gender inequality at the community level. With RISE funding, these grantees will be adapting their promising GBV interventions and applying them to land rights and access, which is an area where Congolese women are particularly at risk. This project will also engage men in shifting social norms, training women as change agents to prevent GBV, and expanding women's land rights, thereby boosting their economic security. So the expected outcomes for this particular activity are changing social norms related to GBV and land tenure linkages, really engaging with women as agents of change in the prevention of GBV, and increasing women and men's awareness of land rights and how to access titling. And then our fifth grantee that I'm thrilled will also be talking about their activity after I present is Securing Land Rights and Ending Gender Exclusion project in Eastern Uganda by Trocare, Land Equality Movement of Uganda, or LIMU, and Sukadidu, the Soroti Catholic Diocese Integrated Development Organization. So with RISE funding, Trocare, LIMU, and Sukadidu will integrate SASA, a proven methodology that addresses power imbalances between men and women to prevent and respond to GBV while improving customary land tenure and property rights in Uganda. And Richard will be talking more about this activity, so I will leave it at that, as he will share more. I'm really excited to share that through the learning from and leveraging the RISE cohort, we are building stronger communication networks, a cohesive monitoring, evaluation, and learning plan, and really working through gender analysis as a key component in strengthening environmental programming. Our RISE challenge is continuing to provide ongoing capacity and strengthening along with technical support. We are looking at these grantees and developing partnerships not only within the cohort, but also in the countries and communities that they are working in to spread the GBV interventions that they're working on. And we also seek to organize a evidence summit within the next year or so to share what's working with a broader audience. And I'm excited to say that USAID is committing to do a second RISE challenge, so a second cohort within the challenge. And we will be announcing that challenge application later this month to fund a new set of grantees to address this intersection of gender-based violence and environment. So please visit competitions for, the number 4, dev.org, and we'll put this in the chat box for the latest challenge announcements and to subscribe for more email updates. It is my honor to yield this floor to Richard from Trocare, who will present on their project in the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Richard Luka from Trocare, Uganda. Trocare is an Irish international organization, NGO. I would like to say good afternoon to everyone, good morning to everyone, and a very special thank you to the organizers of this very important and productive discussion, and also for giving Trocare and myself, of course, the opportunity to participate, but also to share some contextual related issues, lessons, experiences, and strategies from Uganda regarding GBV and environmental linkages. Now, my presentation is going to focus on 3 major areas. The first one will be the context that I'll be speaking about very briefly, of course, from Uganda regarding GBV and environmental linkages. The second one will be what does the RISE project mean for Trocare Uganda, and what strategies do we intend on using. And then the last will be how the RISE project will contribute to our results. Now, if I may start with the first area, that is the context. In Uganda, and in especially Eastern Uganda and Northern Uganda, there are a number of traditional practices, such as the unchallenged discrimination in inheritance rights, that reinforce the social permission for structure, for mistreatment and often violence against women and girls. For example, through the fettering the right to consent, where there is a limited participation of women and girls when it comes to decision-making processes, but also reinforcing the notion of women as commodities that are part of the community wealth. And this exacerbates GBV and HIV transmission, and also diminishing women's contributions to marriage and aggravating landlessness and poverty, especially in the event of a refund demanded at separation. Now, in the communities in Uganda, and this is really very strange. It is very, very strange when you start speaking about inheritance by the girl child. And it's really surprising because it doesn't only happen in rural communities, but also in urban communities. If I may just give an example, we had the former Prime Minister of Uganda, Professor Apollo Nsibambi, who passed away last year. And it shocked very many Ugandans when they heard that he had picked on one of his daughters as the heir to his home. And that actually attracted a lot of criticism. And we kept wondering, why must that be the case? Because we are all working towards ensuring that there is gender equality. The second thing that I want to share is it's true that about 5% of the land-related cases are handled in court, and the rest are referred to what we call the alternative dispute resolution. However, the traditional structures that we work with still lack the capacity to effectively handle these conflicts, subsequently putting women and girls at a disadvantage. I'd like to briefly speak about why we applied for the RISE project. This was a very, very perfect opportunity for us to integrate our programming. Trocare, when you look at its strategic focus, we have 4 major global programming areas. The first one is on governance and human rights, and then the second one is on natural resource use and rights. The third looks at women empowerment and reducing GBV associated risks. And then the last one looks at our humanitarian work. Now, in Uganda, we are looking at 3 major components. Our programming focuses on 3 major components. That's the component on women empowerment, natural resource use and rights, and governance. Unfortunately, during our strategic planning period that happened about 3 years for the current strategic plan, we didn't pay a lot of attention on integrating these 2 programming areas. And so when we heard about the RISE challenge, this was a very, very perfect opportunity for us to integrate our GBV work, but also our land work. Now, the traditional structures that we work with, the clan leaders that we work with, have very limited capacity. And as you know, most of these land-related issues manifest as gender-based violence, but they lack the capacity to address, first of all, the land-related issues using the ADR system that we've been using under the Resource Use and Rights Program. But also, on the other hand, they are not able to handle the GBV-related cases or issues that arise during these land processes or conflicts. Now, the project, we do not do direct implementation. And just like the previous speaker mentioned, we are working with 2 community-based implementing partners. That is LEMU, Land Equity Movement Uganda, and then Sokadido, that is also Caritas Sorority. Those are the 2 implementing partners that we are working with under the RISE project. And it's also very positive, very good for me to share that we've been working with them for the last 14 years in the same region. Now, the goal of the project is to ensure that rural women secure customary land tenure in a manner that respects their rights and reduces GBV risks associated with land conflicts in the 2 districts of Eastern Uganda, and that is Bukedia and Kadaku district. The consortium will integrate the Proven Sasa Faith methodology, and this is a behavior change methodology that looks at addressing prevention and response of GBV through rebalancing power between women and men. Sasa is a Kiswahili word that means now. And the first S stands for start. The second is awareness. The third is support. And the last one is action. So it moves, it's a transformational methodology that looks at, first of all, raising awareness among the community by mobilizing them to understand and appreciate that there are GBV issues and they have been happening. And then you start raising awareness, but also supporting the victims of gender-based violence. Now, using this approach, we'll be training community leaders and partner staff to support positive social norms, raise awareness, improve understanding of the needs of women who are facing GBV, and support GBV survivors through access to referral systems. The leaders will also be able to document the land rights through gender-sensitive demarcation with a customary system to ensure women can exercise their rights and ensure their tenure. In the process, the project will seek to develop and implement the gender-sensitive dispute resolution mechanism. The last area that I would like to speak about is on the results. And just very quickly, this is how we envision how the RISE project will contribute to, first of all, like I said earlier on, it's very strategically aligned to our global programming areas. So, of course, our meal planning processes, we started by putting in place, we use the results-based meal planning approach, where we start by ensuring that there's a results chain or a logic model. And of course, since we use a results-based approach, we develop a results chain looking at the long-term outcome, the intermediate outcome, and immediate outcomes. And of course, the tools that we use, we have tools that I'll be sharing. We have tools that gather information around the impact of the project, but also the process monitoring tools. Now, the results that we anticipate to achieve in this program is, first of all, this is going to help us to improve on the way that the ADR is done by being sensitive about women issues. The second one, we hope that that GBV during land-related disputes will reduce, and then people, especially women, will have knowledge on what to do and where to go when faced with GBV. And then lastly, the traditional leaders, that is the structure that we'll be working with, will be more gender sensitive while handling ADR, and will also have the capacity to effectively address GBV once it arises during these land processes or disputes. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Richard. I just want to echo what Che said around how excited we are about our RISE Challenge grantees and those who won the grant after such a competitive process. So congratulations, and we're really excited that you all are part of the cohort. I wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We have a few minutes now for Q&A, so I'm going to start reading out the questions that we've received, but if you have any now, please add them in and I will do my best to get to them. I wanted to also just mention there's a lot of questions coming in about the slides and whether or not they will be available, how to sign up for future webinars, and get more information. So you can do that by going to the agent website. Maybe Jamie, you could put the link in there. We will share the recording of this and the slides with all of the registrants, and you'll be able to also sign up for the future webinars. And I also added the link to the RISE Challenge RFA for the next call for applications. Kate, I wanted to start with you. A couple of questions have come in for IUCN, and there's two, so I'll just give them both to you so you can answer. What are some practical things that environmental colleagues can do if they want to address, prevent and respond GBV in their programs? Where can they find practical guidance and best practices? And then also, what is the long-term goal for IUCN? And Che, also, this will come to you for USAID in terms of working in this nexus and addressing these issues.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Corinne. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for those fabulous questions. First of all, there are practical tools and guidance that exist out there. One of the challenges is that they're not tailored to us, environment practitioners, programmers, advisors, policymakers, but we can learn a lot by looking at experience and tools from other sectors, including in particular development specifically and humanitarian intervention sectors. So we actually, in our publication, in every single chapter, at the end of each chapter, there's a box of tools that we found useful, practically useful through our research process, which you can go to and access immediately. We will also be, I was going to announce this at the end, but here's a sneak peek. We will be launching a knowledge platform very soon, where we will be bringing together all of the resources that we actually reviewed for this research, and trying to make a more user-friendly space for you working across your sectors to be able to tap into existing guidance that exists. We are also, and this is part of our long-term goal, I'm going to answer a couple of things at once here. At the end of the day, our long-term goal is transformation, realizing our vision of a just world that values and conserves nature. And part of that is a just, safe, equitable treatment and respect for human beings as part of our environments, as part of our ecosystems. Incrementally, we have many steps underway, which we invite you to work with us on and help us inform what needs to happen next. But incrementally, one of the main things that we endeavor to do next, actually many things already underway, is actually taking some of those tools from other sectors and tailoring them more to environment-specific sectors and spheres. That also means tailoring what we think of as the sort of foundational gender tools. But actually, and this is a very specific example, the majority of environment projects right now are required to do a gender analysis and develop a gender strategy or action plan. We found that actually, practically, I'm sure there are examples out there, but practically none of that gender analysis guidelines pays specific attention to GBV, including ours. So we're fixing that now. So as part of our long-term journey here, we are taking steps to try to build together with many of you, with many different organizations, that practical tools and guidance that hopefully will help us really realize our rights-based approaches.
Great, thank you. A lot of questions coming in. So Che, let me turn it to you. Can you share what USAID's long-term vision is on working in this space, and how does USAID plan to support this work?
Great question. Yeah, so USAID is very committed to addressing gender-based violence overall and addressing gender-based violence in the environmental sector. Excuse me. The long-term vision is to take learnings from these grantees who are working on, as mentioned, a variety of different sectors, and then work with our environmental colleagues at USAID and both in the Washington and field offices to integrate the learnings into environmental activities that USAID is funding. We are looking to work with other donors, work with other governments to look at this issue from not only data that is being collected, but also working to elevate the voices of those who are affected by gender-based violence and environmental programming. So our long-term vision is to really create a platform around research and putting that into practice, and taking more learnings and continuing to apply that. I will say, from a gender perspective and the gender-based violence portfolio, it's important for gender advisors and GBV advisors to also see this intersection. And sometimes we see ourselves siloed out or don't think necessarily about the environment and it's it increasing gender-based violence or even creating opportunities for gender-based violence. So I looked that our gender colleagues will also be taking learnings from this and applying it to activities that have a gender lens to it, or specifically a gender-based violence objective. So it's, you know, really integrating this into USAID's analysis, gender analysis and GBV assessments, risk assessments to strengthen all programming across USAID.
Great, thank you, Che. And I really want to emphasize that point that USAID is not only funding this work to support external partners around the world who work in these spaces to better address gender-based violence, but we are trying to really ensure that the way USAID does business addresses these issues as well. I'll pose a couple of substantive questions and maybe for the presenters, if you have an answer, just go ahead and answer them because I think all of you may have some knowledge to weigh in, so I don't want to specify who might be best. One question is coming in around policy changes. They note that in Africa, without policy change, addressing gender-based violence would be very difficult. So I wonder if anyone wants to speak to what kinds of changes in policy at the national level might be useful. Someone is asking specifically about tools and data collection. Is there anything available to help environment practitioners collect data on gender-based violence? And then the last question I will pose in case there's people who want to weigh in on all of them is, how can the health sector get involved? And are there ways to create interdisciplinary partnerships with the health sector? And Chelsea, I'm thinking that maybe you might want to weigh in on sort of how we've addressed and really emphasized interdisciplinary partnerships with health and others through the RISE Challenge. Let me turn it to the speakers to see if anyone wants to weigh in on those.
Hello?
Yes, Richard, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, it's Richard here. So I'll respond to about the question, the issue on policy, and then also the tools. Regarding policy, I would like to say that as earlier on when I was presenting, I focused on sharing our key strategic areas. But one thing that stands out across those strategic areas is that we also engage in a lot of advocacy. And this advocacy happens at all levels. So we have advocacy at community level, where we are working with what we call the community activists under the SASA methodology. So they are working with district authorities to push for some of these policy related issues that are hindering and promoting violence. But also we have partners at national level that are working with parliamentarians and so many other advocacy stakeholders. So this is something that we integrate across all the different goals that we work towards. So even for the RISE project, we'll still continue trying to link these different programming strategies and ensure that advocacy is also a cross-cutting issue. So there are issues, that is what we are doing, but also specifically we are looking at things around domestic violence, things around GBV, and pushing for some of these policies to be changed, but also budgeting. We've also been working with the Ministry of Finance and also the Gender Ministry to ensure that some of these policy-related issues are addressed. Regarding the tools, now the SASA faith itself, the good thing is that it comes with a complete package. So we have the SASA faith toolkit that has the monitoring and evaluation framework, but also what has happened, for instance, when we're designing the baseline, we picked some tools from our currently running natural resource use and rights program, tools around the land work that we are doing, and then we're able to come up with one consolidated tool that looks at areas of SGBV in terms of knowledge, attitudes, and practices, and then also relating them to land rights and land conflict. So we have some tools, and if people are interested, we could be able to share something around SASA, the SASA approach, because we also have the rapid assessment tool that it's a survey that looks at, it's a CAP survey that looks at knowledge, attitudes, and practices. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Richard. Che, Kate, Chelsea, do you want to weigh in at all?
Yeah, I'd like to say something related to the policy change question, which is a really fundamental one. Just a couple of points here. You know, how we create policy and how we create policy change depends very much on whose voices are participating and informing and creating those policies. We, and I mean the big we, the global community we still tend to work in very siloed, sector-specific, siloed ways, don't we? And we see over and over again how very important it is to include the ministries of gender, women's organizations, diverse voices in policymaking spaces at national, subnational, local levels to really identify the barriers, the issues, so that policy can respond and inform and take steps to address those very issues. We still see rather pervasive gaps when we look at environment policy across the board, as well as gender equality and women's empowerment policy in terms of not including the other. And so taking those meaningful steps to broaden who we consider as stakeholders, who we consider and listen to as rights holders really matters for how we create policy change at all levels. And I think Che and Chelsea, I don't think we've had a chance to really introduce Chelsea yet, but she's done a remarkable job in terms of organizing the RISE challenge and winners.
Thanks, Kate. This is Chelsea. I support USAID's Gen Dev team and work with IUCN on implementing RISE. And I wanted to touch on some of the work that Richard has been doing using the tools such as SASA Faith methodology, which is great. One of the reasons why the main objectives of the RISE challenge was to find existing tools that are being used in other sectors, such as the health sector or the humanitarian sector, and provide support to see how these tools can be adapted and implemented in environmental projects. So we're really looking forward to the outcomes of the 5 grantees and seeing which methodologies and tools work in what geographical context and in what environmental sectors, and what didn't work, and then sharing that information out through to a larger audience, to stakeholders like yourselves that are on this call in the environment sector, but also gender-based organizations. And this information will be made available on the RISE website, which is being shared through the chat, but also on IUCN's knowledge platform. So as that becomes available, we'll be sure to let you know. I also wanted to highlight that what makes the RISE challenge really exciting is the innovative partnerships that have been formed to implement this work. As you heard Che speak about, the implementing partners come from both the environment sector and the gender sector, and also community-based organizations, and they have designed projects that pull on the strengths of each of their organizations to better understand how gender-based violence is unfolding in the communities that they're living and working in, and designing these solutions to respond and address them. So this is something that we're really excited about, and keep your eyes peeled on the knowledge platform and the RISE website for additional tools and learnings as we move forward in the next 2 years of implementation.
Thank you, Chelsea. And I do have to now pivot to closing because we are running out of time. But I wanted to note that we are getting a lot of questions and we definitely have not been able to answer them all. So we will follow up with those who've asked questions to provide specific answers as much as we can. We will also share this recording and the slides, as I mentioned. And I just wanted to note that we have hundreds of people on this webinar. So there is obviously a huge appetite for learning about these topics and doing work in these areas. We will provide more information on how to stay engaged beyond what we've discussed here. Kate, should I turn it to you for closing remarks?
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Just a couple last notes, everyone, as we come to the close here, and thanks to those of you who are still on the line. We wanted to actually share with you what you told us when you were filling out, when the registrants filled out the questions to register for this webinar. Most responses here show a real interest in more in-depth information on specific issues and intersections of issues, followed by specific tools. This came out in the questions as well, of course, to mainstream GBV considerations across environmental projects. So good news, that's exactly what comes next for us. And we really invite you to join us to build these next steps together. So first, this webinar series will continue. Our next session is most likely going to be late July or early August. So watch your email boxes. Diverse partners and speakers will co-host and help build each of these subsequent sessions. So please do feel free to contact us directly if you have an interest to collaborate. Among the many promising practice we aim to feature, the sessions will also specifically feature these RISE implementers who will share their lessons as they go. A knowledge platform devoted specifically to GBV and environment linkages will launch very soon, most likely around the time of this next webinar. And here you'll be able to search existing resources as well as download and use the infographics from across sectors that you've seen in these slides and also are in our publication. And there's also a special spotlight space that will be held on this platform specifically to capture and amplify the learning and results of RISE as well as other collaborations in development. I also want to mention that the full paper will launch soon in both Spanish and French, so stay tuned for that. The platform will also be a key space for convening, building together with you, we hope, the momentum of a community of practice to tackle these issues. And finally, we know our community needs tools and support. And so we're committed to building and supporting the development and promotion of tailored tools, as well as to providing technical support to a wide range of projects and efforts. So we're about to close here, but if you can spare another moment, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. I believe in a moment, Jamie's gonna send up to our screen, yes, a quick poll. Jamie, could you walk through this briefly?
Hi, everyone. We just wanted to touch back in and ask you again to kind of rate what you feel your current level of knowledge on GBV and environment linkages now. We've just heard from a lot of experts from across various walks of the environment and sustainable development sector. So we wanted to get a sense of feedback from all of you on how this knowledge may be applied so that we can also, moving forward, apply your feedback as a part of our future series. We will keep this poll open for just a few more seconds. So if people can make their selections in the next 10 seconds, that's greatly appreciated. Okay, great. So I'm going to close that poll now in the interest of time, and I will share those results with you now. So hopefully, we've seen a bit of a change in the trends from the beginning of our webinar. And again, we will use this to adjust and program our future series. And we just have one more question for you. And that is a very quick question. It's a yes/no question. And we just wanted to check to see if this webinar, if you feel that it can be applied to your areas of work. Again, we'll leave this on for just a few moments. to collect your answers. And we'll also use this information to be able to adjust our future programming. And we'll do just about 15 seconds more on this poll. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'm going to close that poll now and share the results with you. And Kate, I'll hand it over back to you now.
Okay, 94%, that's not bad. We'll get to 100% in our next webinar. Thanks everybody. We're at our time. We're really grateful for your time and for your attention today. We wish you a beautiful and safe and peaceful day. Take care, and we hope to stay in close touch.